Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we are going to be diving into Australian housing. So we've got some really interesting sources for you today. A Westpac report on homeownership trends and a news.com.au article about what Aussies really want in a home. You know, get ready for some surprises because we're going to go beyond just those headlines and really try to figure out what is really going on.
Yeah, it is a very interesting time to be taking a look at this. There's a lot of data out there that kind of conflicts with other data and some really fascinating trends emerging.
Okay, so let's just start with the big one here, the elephant in the room. Affordability. Both these sources are kind of painting a bleak picture, right? High prices, rising interest rates, cost of living is through the roof. I mean, it's just a tough time to be out there looking for a place. The Westpac report actually said that only 9.1% of Australians are planning to buy a home in the next 6 months. That is the lowest number they've ever seen across all of their surveys. So are people just giving up on the dream?
I don't think it's as simple as that. What's really fascinating about this is that while those short-term buying plans are down, the long-term outlook is actually pretty different. 60% of Aussies still say that they plan to buy a home in the next 1 to 5 years. So I think it's less about giving up on the dream, and it's more about this delay, don't deny kind of approach. They're waiting for the market to cool down, or maybe just for their own finances to catch up. We call this pent-up demand, basically.
Yeah.
A bunch of potential buyers are sitting on the sidelines, but they're ready to jump in as soon as the time is right.
So less about lack of desire and more just like a lack of possibility right now. I mean, that makes sense, but this whole delay thing must be especially tough in first-time home buyers. I mean, they're already facing an uphill battle.
Absolutely. The report found that it's actually taking first-time home buyers 6 months longer to save for a deposit than it did just back in 2021. And on top of that, those deposits are almost $4,000 smaller. That's a huge blow when you're already dealing with things like wage stagnation.
Yeah.
And, crazy high rents.
Yeah, it makes you wonder if first-time home buyers are even considering like traditional home ownership anymore. Are there any other strategies that they're looking at?
Well, one that's definitely gaining some traction is this idea of rent vesting. So imagine this. You buy an investment property, somewhere that's a little bit more affordable, like a unit maybe in a regional center that's growing, but you continue renting in the city or the suburb that you really love. So that way you're getting your foot on the property ladder. You're not breaking the bank, but you still get to live in the place that you really want to be.
Kind of like having your avocado toast and eating it too, right? But there's got to be some downsides. What's the catch?
Yeah. Well, for one thing, you're now managing 2 properties, which always comes with its own headaches and its own set of costs. And you're kind of betting on that regional market growing in value. And of course, you're still renting right. So you don't really have that security and stability that comes with owning your own home. It's a really complex decision for sure.
Okay, let's shift gears a little bit and talk about that news.com.au article. I was really struck by how much Aussies still really love houses. 84% of potential buyers said they want a detached house or a townhouse. No tiny apartments, thank you very much. And I get that. I mean, I totally get that. But it does seem like that preference is part of the problem here.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely contributes to the price pressure. When everyone wants a house, demand goes up. And so do prices. And here's where it gets interesting. Australia actually builds more homes per capita than a lot of other comparable countries. But they're not building the types of homes that people actually want.
Oh, wow. So we're building, but it's not actually what the market is looking for.
Okay, well, that explains why things feel so squeezed.
Yeah.
So are we seeing any changes in terms of where people want to live? Are the city centers kind of losing their allure? The Westpac report actually does highlight a few interesting shifts. And yeah, there is definitely less interest in inner city living. The suburbs and those regional areas are seeing a huge surge in popularity, which aligns with, the rise of all these flexible work arrangements and just the post-pandemic desire for more space and a different pace of life. So, for example, Brisbane's northern suburbs are booming right now. They offer a really good mix of affordability and lifestyle amenities and reasonable access to the city still. And in Adelaide, we're seeing kind of this westward drift. People are being drawn to those coastal suburbs and a more relaxed vibe.
So the Aussie dream is literally moving outward. That is fascinating. But what about the bank of mom and dad? Are parents still helping young people get into the market?
Family support is still a really significant factor. But the report does kind of suggest that it might be becoming less available. Parents are facing their own financial pressures these days. Everything from rising living costs to having to plan for their own retirement. And those changes in living arrangements and flexible work that we were talking about, if parents are downsizing or working remotely or living further away, the kind of support they can offer is going to be different.
Yeah, it's like this chain reaction, you know? The housing market is putting pressure on everyone, even those who aren't directly trying to buy or sell. But before we wrap up this first part of our deep dive, I want to talk about one more trend. This one really surprised me. It might actually be a little bit of a silver lining in all of this.
It seems like while some are relying on family, others are getting a little more creative. And, well, you notice how many people are renovating these days?
Oh my gosh, yes. It seems like everyone I know is either like knee deep in some DIY project or they're like on a first name basis with their contractor. I'll admit I've even been looking at some new kitchen backsplash myself, but I thought that was just me like catching the home improvement bug or something.
Well, it's not just you. The Westpac report actually found that over 19% of Australians are planning to renovate in the next year, which is up from 17% last year. And get this, over 35% are planning renovations in the next 5 years. So it doesn't look like this is just a passing fad. This is like a pretty big shift.
Wow, those are some huge numbers. But why is this happening? Is it just because people can't afford to move, so they're just trying to, you know, make their current homes nicer?
I mean, that's definitely part of it, right? It's like saying, okay, well, if I can't upgrade my house, I'm going to upgrade my existing house. But I think there's more to it than that. You know, we've had those really low interest rates the last few years, which has made it easier and, you know, more appealing to borrow money for these renovations. And then on top of that, we've got all these home improvement shows. And all over social media, it's just feeds full of these like perfectly styled spaces. It definitely feels like they're fueling that desire to create these, you know, Instagram-worthy homes.
So is the Aussie dream of like a house with a yard, is that becoming the dream of a house with a perfectly renovated kitchen, you know? Just to make all those like Instagram-worthy sourdough loaves.
Yeah. Maybe there's some truth to that. But on a more serious note, I do think that this renovation boom, it could actually be a sign that we're shifting how we value our homes. Maybe it's becoming less about just the size and more about creating these spaces that really reflect who we are and really meet our specific needs.
Yeah, I mean, there's something really satisfying about making a space yours. It's like a different kind of ownership, isn't it? It's more about customization and self-expression.
Exactly. And I think it could change the housing landscape in some really interesting ways. If people are more focused on renovating, it could have an impact on what builders prioritize in new homes. Maybe we'll see less emphasis on just those, you know, cookie cutter designs, and we'll start to see more flexibility for people to actually customize their homes.
Yeah, and it could even lead to like a whole new wave of specialized tradespeople and designers, people who can really help create those bespoke living spaces.
Right. Maybe we'll even see like renovation consultants pop up to help homeowners plan and manage all these complex projects.
Okay, this is getting me excited. Like a renovation nation. Where everyone's just focused on creating their dream space, whether they own like a mansion or just a modest apartment.
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting possibility. But, you know, we should probably keep our feet on the ground a little bit here, because this trend isn't a cure-all for all the problems in the housing market. Affordability is still a massive issue. And this renovation boom could actually end up making inequality even worse.
Oh, yeah, that's a good point. I mean, not everyone can afford to renovate even if they want to. And if the people who can afford it are constantly, you know, upgrading their homes, it could just widen the gap between those who have and those who don't.
Exactly. And it also brings up some questions about whether all of this is even sustainable. If everyone is focused on renovating, what happens to the people who are still trying to buy their first home? Are we accidentally creating a two-tiered housing market?
That is definitely something to think about. I guess what we're seeing is this like really complex mix of adaptation and aspiration, and maybe even a little bit of escapism.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. I mean, this is really just a fascinating microcosm of these bigger challenges facing the Australian housing market and honestly just Austrian society as a whole.
Yeah.
But hey, let's not end on such a downer note.
Yes, please. I need a little bit of optimism after all this talk of housing headaches. What are your thoughts on where we go from here? What does the future hold for the Aussie dream?
Well, given everything we've been talking about, where do you see this whole Aussie dream heading? Is it still all about, you know, owning that detached house? Or is it kind of evolving into something different?
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question, right? I think the Aussie dream is definitely evolving. It feels like it's becoming more nuanced, more personalized, and hopefully more attainable for a wider range of people.
I really like that.
Yeah.
So how does this whole Renovation Nation thing fit into all of that? Could it be like a sign of what's to come?
It very well could be right. If we are seeing this shift from, valuing the size of a property, to valuing a really personalized living space. I mean, that could have like a ripple effect on everything. From the way that we design houses to, even policy changes, maybe we'll start to see more innovative housing models that prioritize, flexibility and customization over just square footage.
Exactly. So instead of just building more houses, we'll start building smarter houses.
Yeah.
Or maybe we'll even rethink what house even means.
I love that. So the Aussie dream could become less about owning a specific type of dwelling and more about, having that freedom and that flexibility to really create a space that reflects your values and your lifestyle, whether that's a renovated apartment or a co-living arrangement, or maybe even like a sustainable tiny home out in the bush.
Exactly. It's about finding what truly works for you, not just chasing some, outdated ideal.
Well said. But let's be real for a second. Even with all this talk about, evolving dreams, affordability is still a huge barrier for a lot of Australians. What can we do about that? Like, are there any solutions out there on the horizon?
It's a really complex problem. There's no easy answers.
Yeah.
It's going to take a multi-pronged approach, I think. We're going to need some changes in government policy, some innovation coming from the industry itself, and maybe even a little bit of a shift in our cultural mindset.
Okay, let's break that down. So what kind of policy changes could actually make a difference here?
Well, one thing we could look at is maybe reforming those zoning laws so that we can allow for more, diverse housing types like townhouses or duplexes in areas that are currently zoned for just single-family homes. We could also maybe explore some incentives for developers to get them to build more affordable options, maybe through things like density bonuses or tax breaks.
And what about on the industry side? Are there any innovations that could kind of shake things up?
Oh, definitely. I mean, we're already seeing some really cool stuff happening with prefabricated construction and modular construction, which can make building, faster and cheaper. And there's a lot more interest these days in co-living models and these build-to-rent developments, which could offer more accessible pathways to secure housing.
So it sounds like there's a lot of potential for some really creative solutions out there, but you also mentioned like a shift in our cultural mindset. What did you mean by that?
Well, I think as a society, we need to have a really honest conversation about what our expectations are when it comes to housing. Do we really all need a detached house with a big backyard? Or could we be open to, smaller, more sustainable spaces if it meant that housing was more affordable and accessible?
Yeah, it's like we need to redefine what success looks like in the housing market. Maybe it's not about, having the biggest house on the block. Maybe it's about finding a place that really, truly meets your needs and allows you to live a good life.
Exactly. The Aussie dream is becoming less about following this one prescribed path and more about, just having choices and having options.
I love that. So it sounds like the future of housing in Australia. Well, it's full of possibilities, both exciting and challenging. Definitely a space to keep our eyes on.
Definitely. And for all our listeners out there, just remember to keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep dreaming big when it comes to what you want your housing to look like. Who knows what the Aussie dream will look like in 5 or 10 years?
That is such a great note to end on. And for everyone listening, remember you can find links to all of the sources that we talked about today down in the show notes. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the always interesting world of Australian housing.
Until next time, happy diving.